Good evening, everyone. Let me start by thanking participants for joining this webinar and also the panelists for this webinar to kindly agree to speak in this on this topic. I must say that we have a eclectic panel of the best experts in the area of public health in this country. This webinar is part of two-part webinar series in which we are going to talk about leaving no one behind in context of COVID-19 home isolation for vulnerable population. Today is the first webinar, which will be for 90 minutes, and then on 3rd June, we have a second webinar. We are going to talk something which actually has first mentioned in historical literature around 2,700 years ago. The term isolation has appeared in the various contexts of diseases, infectious diseases, 7th BC in various documents. So isolation is well before the quarantine, which came in the fashion in 14th century after Black Death pandemic. So something which is really known for so long. And now in the context of COVID-19, we are going to talk about isolation and home isolation. Home isolation is relatively new, but not that new. Even in great influenza pandemic in 1918, home isolation was recommended for a number of people, especially those army personnel for whom there were symptoms. The medical doctor recommended home isolation. So home isolation had been recommended for in the previous pandemics also. But that is not the only thing. There have been hospitals which intended to isolate patients. These hospitals were for the tuberculosis, leprosy, and even plague. And nowadays, or sometimes later, these hospitals were renamed as infectious disease hospitals. In context of COVID-19 pandemic, there was initial focus and attention on having institutional isolation. The idea of home isolation initially started with the health workers who got infection, and they were allowed to be isolated at home if they had some provision. And then the state of Delhi started allowing home isolation on particular conditions. However, it met some resistance. We know over the last 1 year, a majority of patients or the people who tested COVID-19 positive, especially the asymptomatic one who were incidentally identified or diagnosed, or the mild cases have been isolated at the home. But home isolation is not that easy. There are challenges which are associated with it. In the last 1 year, we have learned a lot. The first Government of India guideline on home isolation were released in July 2020. The most recent home isolation guidelines have been released in May 2021. However, we know that while guidelines are useful, they are not always easy to implement at the ground level. And it was this backdrop this webinar has been conceived. We realize that while it is easy to do home isolation for the people who have a facilities and provision of separate room, an attached bathroom, and a caretaker, but we know that India is a vast country and there are population subgroups, which include urban poor, which include LGBTQ, which include a rural population, which include pregnant and lactating women, and a wide range of groups, including people with disability, for whom, due to multitude of reasons, home isolation is not possible. So what can be done? We need to think of a practical approaches which can help in operationalizing the broader guidelines which are there for home isolation. If that kind of thinking not there, it will always remain on a document on the paper. We are still in the mid of the pandemic, and we know that every patient does not require hospitalization or admission in the isolation facility. But we also know that people are frightened with getting admitted in an isolation facility. Their experience in the past is very not so good with the isolation facility, but also there are various kind of apprehensions. So they do not go to isolation facility. But we also know that if they do not go to isolation facility and appropriate provision is not done closer to them, then there is a risk that they can pass on the infection or they can hide their condition, and that can result in the pandemic being spreading or infection being spreading. So something need to be done and need to be done quickly. And that's why we have brought the experts who understand the community, who have worked in particular settings, who understand the society, and who has worked on developing these guidelines we want to hear from them that how those guidelines can be operationalized, how those guidelines can be tweaked, or more specific details can be added for some specific population. So to ensure that that guideline or those guidelines do not remain just instructions on the paper, but actually implemented on the various levels. With this backdrop, we will do 2 webinars. And today, before I go to the main panelists, I would like to invite Ms. Sangeeta Patel, who is Director of Health Office of USAID, to please deliver opening remarks. Ms. Sangeeta Patel.
Thank you so much. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to take the time right now to really appreciate the work of the NISHDA program of JPIGO, and really honor this space where we recognize that the situation in India is really grim. And certainly, as we've been reading the newspapers and just looking at our own families, our loved ones, our communities torn apart, it's been just devastating. As we start to look at, a health system here that's challenged across all levels, to me, it becomes imperative that all of us that are working, especially within this space of Ayushman Bharat and primary healthcare, that we do everything that we can to really be able to beat the statistics, to be able to change the tide, and really to fight not only this second surge, but future ones. I think that from my perspective, I've been nothing but, I suppose startled, and even beyond that, just doing the best we can to cope and to survive, knowing that each of us have lost near and dear ones next to us, and it's just been a most tragic trajectory. But I think that in this space, I'd like to think we have hope that with home isolation and care, we're able to otherwise unburden, if you will, a secondary and tertiary system where we can, to the best of our ability, continue to provide care and support, help our loved ones, and also be able to ensure prevention of further transmission. I know that in this fight, really, everyone has to do their part. And home isolation and care is just one part of that continuum where we're able to provide support, not only at the facility, but at the community and at an individual level from within our households. There's so much more we need to do. And certainly the United States Agency for International Development stands with you today, especially in India, as we look at, bringing in over $118 million in resources, not only for prevention, detection, response, mitigation, and recovery, but also, frankly speaking, partnership. Because as India faces some of the most alarming statistics in the world in terms of active cases and increasing in number of new infections, we also know that we're also finding innovative ways to provide care and support, and it remains an example even for others as they look to see how to survive, how to not only survive, but how to combat, how to recover. That's why my hope and partnership remains with India. USAID looks forward to this journey together with you, with the JPIGO team, with NISHDA, and certainly in this next chapter, particularly with home isolation and care. So thank you very much. And with that, I pass it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Patel. So these were the perfect opening backdrop for now inviting our panelists. We know that this webinar is being organized jointly by Indian Association of Preventive and Social Medicine and USAID, NISHDA, and JPIGO team. We have with us as one of the panelists, President of Indian Association of Preventive and Social Medicine, Dr. Sunila Garg. She's a Director Professor of Department of Community Medicine at Maulana Azad Medical College. Without further ado, I invite her to deliver her initial remarks for 5 to 7 minutes. Dr. Garg,
Thank you, Dr. Chandrakant. Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you, team of Jipaigo, USAID, and Nishtha, and my own very association, IAPSM, of which, I'm one of the principal members. And no less than I could, feel so touchy from the opening remarks that, when I stand today in front of you, we have got 2.8 crore cases, 8.2% positivity. And yesterday there was some silver lining with 1.2 lakh cases, and we all know that where we went up to over 4 lakh cases. So with this, I will start my presentation. And so basically, you can make out that primarily we are talking about home isolation, and it's about home isolation. So these are some of the things which we need to look at. Primarily, we are all aware of the fact that 80 to 85% COVID-19 cases are asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, which call for a need for home management, and they require no hospitalization, maybe can be managed at home or in COVID care isolation facilities, which may be there, nearer to their house, in Panchayati Raj institutions, in banquet halls or something like that. So all the detailed website, guidelines are available at Ministry of Health and Family Welfare's website. I think you can all see my screen. I will just make it at this. Okay. So you see, the patients who are clinically assigned to be mild asymptomatic are recommended for home isolation as per ministry's guidelines. And these are laboratory confirmed cases not experiencing any symptoms or having oxygen saturation at room air of 94%. Another thing which I would like to add, that now, we are looking at, if there's one person who is positive, we are presuming that others are positive because of overwhelming healthcare systems. Clinically assigned mild cases are the patients with upper respiratory tract symptoms and or fever without shortness of breath and having oxygen saturation at room air of more than 94%. The treating medical professional can ascertain all this. And also we are aware of that elderly patients who are aged more than 60 years and with comorbid conditions, we are all aware of diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, chronic kidney disease, liver disease, lung disease, they are allowed home isolation only after proper evaluation by treating medical officer. Now, what are the instructions for the client? The patient must isolate himself or herself from other household members, staying in a well-ventilated room with cross ventilation and windows and away from other people in the home. People at all time use either, N95 mask if it is available, or triple layer mask or medical mask to be discarded after 8 hours after disinfecting it with 1% sodium hypochlorite. Patients must take rest, drink a lot of fluids to maintain adequate hydration, and follow respiratory etiquette and hand washing. And they don't share personal items with other people in the household. That does not mean that they are discriminated. We have to make them a part of the family, at the same time empower them that we are with you and you have to take care of your own things. And if they are not capable of, then other family members can take care of. Self-monitoring of blood oxygen saturation with pulse oximeter and daily temperature monitoring is strongly advised. Continue the medication for comorbid illness after consulting the treating physician. Now, another thing is that we have to be very, very clear that no steroids, no antibiotics without doctor's prescription, no remdesivir at home. Mental health is one of the critical important components of COVID-19 response. Patients have to be provided symptomatic management of fever, running nose and cough. They have to perform warm water gargles or take steam inhalation twice a day. If fever is not controlled, tablet paracetamol 650 milligram 4 times a day. A PHC doctor to be consulted, who may consider advising other drugs like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and consider tablet ivermectin, which is there now in the kit of Anganwadi workers and ASHA, or to the tune of 200 microgram per kg per day, to be taken empty stomach for 3 days. And also inhalation of budesonide given by inhalers, spacers at a dose of 800 microgram twice daily. That means we are talking about 2 puffs for 5 to 7 days, to be given if symptoms are persisting beyond 5 days of disease onset. But most important is that we have to monitor the oxygen saturation. And if we are talking of urban areas, like if we talk of state of Delhi government has already distributed quite a number of, pulse oximeters, but at village level also, the document takes into consideration that each village will have desirable number of adequate, pulse oximeters and thermometers, and village health sanitation and nutrition committee through Panchayati Raj institutions and administration to mobilize resources to make provision of these equipment so that they can be circulated. And there has to be, the system has been created and which has been initiated to provide pulse oximeters and thermometers on loan to confirmed COVID cases with the help of ASHAs and Anganwadi workers under supervision of multi-purpose workers. And ultimately, even the strong part of the thing is that the volunteers are also being involved along with family members who have already suffered from COVID, so they are also providing help. The pulse oximeters and thermometers to be sanitized after each use with cotton or cloth soaked in alcohol-based sanitizer. Then again, another important thing is that we are also paying a lot of emphasis to self-proning, and you can see different positions, and for which you need 4 to 5 pillows, 2 pillows, near around the ankle point, then 2 pillows, below the diaphragm, and 1 pillow around here. So that is there. So best is not to spend more than 30 minutes in each position, but we have to be very cautious during pregnancy and obesity, and we have to avoid proning for half an hour after meals. And after every hour we can change the position, and you should not do proning for more than 16 hours a day. That is then in multiple cycles. Another thing which is important is that in urban, semi-rural, rural and tribal areas, follow-up of patients for undergoing isolation or quarantine to be done during, household visits. And as I already told you, there is a home isolation kit which is provided, which contains all the medications which I mentioned earlier: paracetamol, ivermectin, cough syrup, multivitamin, and a detailed pamphlet which is indicating the precautions to be taken, and medication details is given. Monitoring pro forma for monitoring, the oxygen level, the temperature level, and respiratory rate at 4-hourly interval. But if it is not feasible, at least twice a day. Contact details in case of deterioration of health condition and discharge criteria have got to be provided. That is important. Now, another important thing is that the patients or caregivers have to keep monitoring for serious signs and symptoms, including difficulty in breathing, dip in oxygen saturation, that is SpO2 less than 94% on room air, persistent pain, pressure in the chest, and mental confusion or inability to arise. So less than 94%, especially when we are talking of community-based settings or home-based settings, now we talk of 94% to 90%, basically, particularly when we are taking into consideration the proning situation also. So another thing is that if oxygen bed is available, then the person can be referred to, but otherwise, you see, we can try proning position as well. Now, the patient under home isolation to be discharged at least 10 days from the onset of symptom, or no fever for 3 days. There is no need for testing. That is most important after the home isolation period is over. So another thing is that sometimes the person may not have facility at home. So, particularly in rural areas, the COVID care centers are established, or are being established, under the guidance of Panchayati Raj institutions, and where, we are looking at people, basically who are asymptomatic, but they are, having oxygen saturation level of about over 94%. So these could be set in schools, community halls, panchayati buildings, and is in the close proximity to healthcare facilities. Another thing which is important is the CHO, the community health officer, ANM or multi-purpose worker is got to be nodal person for COVID care center. The facility to work under overall guidance of medical officer in charge of primary health center or health and wellness center supported by CHO of, basically health and wellness center. Basically, these are important. Panchayats to be responsible for implementation of upkeep of facilities for which they have been provided funds, and they may hire additional staff for sanitation. Qualified Ayush doctors, final year Ayush students, final year BSc nursing are also being considered by Village Health, Nutrition and Sanitation Committee to run this COVID care center. And we are utilizing telemedicine and e-Sanjeevani services for both COVID and non-COVID essential services. Another thing is that, as I told you, that we have to release the patients after 10 days. after, of testing positive, we do not have to carry out another test. COVID-19 patients who have received home-based care or have been discharged from the hospital should remain in isolation for a period of 10 days, which I already told you. And the healthcare workers need to establish a means of communicating with the caregivers of the individual with COVID-19 for the duration of isolation period. This is important. Sometimes, this time we face the oxygen deficiency. So this is where, we can also think of, if we have a person who can manage, that means the care provider is there who can do the oxygen management at home. That can be, done under supervision, and it can be done at the COVID care center. But if there is a home health available, that can also be given, but it should not be given, more than 90 liters per minute. So these are all very important things. Apart from this, yoga, meditation, keeping, the mental health of the individual to a very positive, level. It's very, very important. Most important role has to be played by the family, the community members. So these are some of the important things. What we have to remember is that the home-based care is important and a critical component of COVID-19 management, as has been mentioned earlier also, that when, we now think of though we lost that many, those many number of people who are our near and dears, the idea comes to our mind, probably if that person could have been managed at home, he or she would have been saved, because he or she would have been in familiar environment. This also, we have recommended that whenever we are admitting the patients, particularly in rural settings, also in urban care setting, if a family member with PPE kit is allowed, he or she will raise not only the morale of the patient, but also help in rapid improvement of the patient. So these are some of the important things of home health care. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garg, for this comprehensive presentation. So now we know two things. One, there are broader guidelines on home isolation, which were released by Government of India on 4th May 2021. These were the revised version. And the Dr. Garg has laid down the detailed structure of guidelines which were released for containment and management of COVID-19 in rural and peri-urban areas in India. These guidelines were released on 16th May 2021. Now, both of these guidelines are complementary and provide a backdrop or principles of home isolation in the country. This webinar would focus upon how those guidelines can be operationalized in various settings, because we know that the guidelines which have been released could be applicable for a majority of settings, but there are settings and population subgroups, the tribals, urban poor, pregnant lactating women, disabled people, for whom the broader guidelines are not enough, and that's what we are going to discuss. So thanks, Dr. Garg, for making the comprehensive presentation and bringing this to the table. Without further ado, the next speaker is Dr. Bulbul Sood. She's the Executive Director of JPIGO. You are requested to please make 7 minutes presentation, focus upon pregnant and lactating women, but also reflecting upon other aspects of home isolation for a specific target population. Dr. Sood.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Chandrakant, and good evening, everyone. We at USAID supported NISHDA program are very proud to be organizing this 2-series webinar with Indian Academy of Preventive and Social Medicine. And thank you very much, my friend Dr. Sunila Garg, for joining and supporting this. And also, I would like to welcome all my fellow panelists. They are, as Chandrakant said, they are the leaders in their field, and we are very proud to be associated with this. As you all know, when last year this pandemic started, I think the first immediate need was to provide essential care to pregnant and lactating women. And JPIGO very quickly moved in thanks to the NISHDA program, and we are working in almost 16, 17 states, that we said we have to ensure that women who are pregnant and lactating at higher, they are not at higher risk of getting COVID infection, but when they get the infection, they are more likely to have severe infection and consequences. And we work with the grassroots level workers to ensure that essential ANC services, and including the intrapartum care, was provided, and the medicines were provided to the women when the healthcare worker visited them at home. and also especially contraceptives for the women who are in the lactating period, but and training them and teaching them about breastfeeding and appropriate COVID-related behavior. Now, coming to the home isolation, and as Dr. Garg has, clearly, described in detail what needs to be done. I think for pregnant women, especially, I think it's important for everyone to realize that it's only asymptomatic cases and mild cases without any co-infection who should be put on home isolation, because as we know that if there are more chances of pregnant women going into complications, and some of the data which I was talking to our colleague Foxians have shown that there are more preterm deliveries and preeclampsia and other cases are increasing. So one thing is very clear, that when you give, when you identify which of the pregnant women can, or for that matter, lactating women can have, home isolation, it's important that they should be the ones who are mild or which, as I said, who have, who are asymptomatic. Now, Dr. Garg clearly, showed what needs to be done, and, appropriate COVID behavior, wearing of the mask, and, maintaining the temperature and SpO2 level and other things are important. But I think it's also important for the pregnant women and their caregiver to realize that what are the warning signals which they should be aware about, like dyspnea or chest pain, and then where they should be immediately taken to. I think because if there is a delay, then it can lead to more complication. And normally the recommendation is that they should be taken to secondary or tertiary care facilities where everything is there to provide that kind of support. I think the other important part which Sunira did mention was how to reduce the stress, especially during the pregnancy time. We know stress can play havoc, and it is very important that stress should be reduced in pregnant women and lactating women. It's important that they should be encouraged to even if watch TV, not watch TV too much about the news, because that really upsets them. But maybe read, listen to music or whatever. But important that they should keep and maintain, as I said, stress reduction is very, very important for the ones who are on home isolation. The kits are provided, the home isolation kits are being provided, but I think it's also important that somebody should be following them up. And I think rapid response teams which are there at the district level, at the CSC level, they should be a way to follow them up and find out how they are doing. And also advise that after 2 weeks of the recovery, they should have a follow-up visit at the facility level to find out how they are doing, how's the fetus growth and everything. So it's important that a follow-up after they recover should be also promoted. The other thing which I would want to also emphasize and is that vaccination. I think it's important that pregnant women, and lactating women should be vaccinated. And in fact, Foxy has came up with a statement on COVID vaccination, and they said that the vaccine is best and long-term solution and can provide protection to the pregnant and lactating women. And the very real benefit of vaccination to pregnant and lactating women seems to outweigh any theoretical or remote risk of vaccination. And I think it's important that during pregnancy they should be vaccinated. And if someone who is found to be COVID positive suffering, then they should be vaccinated 12 weeks after they were found to be infectious, or 4 to 8 weeks after the recovery. So I think it's important that we should also talk about these things during the time when women are in the home and the care providers to say that we need to see the cohort that we are talking about. I stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sood, for adhering to the time and flagging, highlighting some of the key issues where we need to give attention, especially for pregnant and lactating women when they are in home isolation. I understand these are the points which are cross-cutting, and some of these will be discussed in other subsections or other aspects by the other speakers. So I'll move to the next speaker, but before that, I would like to make an announcement that we will take some questions at the end of this round. So first, our panelists will speak, and we are not taking questions right now, but we will definitely take questions before closing this webinar. So in the meantime, you can please type your questions in the chat box. We would also request that please keep your questions focused upon home isolation related aspect. To be efficient, we do not want to discuss other aspects, though those are important, but it will be helpful if you write your questions or also inputs and comments on how home isolation can be better operationalized or implemented at the grassroots level. If you have some experience, you can type on those that chat box and we might pick those up, but we will definitely take some questions, so please wait for that. So with this, I would move to the next speaker, who is Dr. Sundar Raman. Dr. Sundar Raman need no introduction. He's widely known by most of the participants in this webinar, but also across the country and other parts of the world. He has worked with various organizations, including he was Executive Director of National Health System Resource Center. With his wide experience, we have requested him to speak about how becoming more granular and specific on how to operationalize home isolation guidelines. Dr. Sundar.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I think my first comment is that given the reality of what our village is and whatever most of the conditions at which people are living, home isolation is not a desire. Institutional isolation is really essential. But I also concede in the same breath that home isolation is going to be the majority of people who require isolation are undergoing home isolation, over 75% in most states. And therefore, at some point, developing much better guidelines for home isolation becomes a priority. Why did I start with a statement that does not glorify home isolation? First, 75% of households have less than 1 or 2 rooms for a family size which is of average 4 to 5. So the very notion that you can actually have an isolation within the house vis-a-vis family members, you can isolate the family, is a very difficult concept. It's only about 25 to 30% that even prima facie you can start. So if you really start with the criteria, it's much of this guidelines is really upper middle class. It's somewhere very difficult to follow. The second thing is, people will find it very difficult to remain within, leave alone the people who will have, because of essential services, because there is a pressure to work, there is a pressure to earn, there is a pressure on different things. There are very many essential needs. Kept in an isolation, institutional isolation, you have a different situation. But in the house, to actually adhere to home isolation is difficult. And a third issue is a danger of worsening without really being noticed and leading on to admissions too late. By that time, you are struggling. Even in a country like Italy, many of the deaths have been delayed, home isolation converting into institutional hospitalization got delayed. And therefore, there is a considerable loss of life. The fourth thing is the sort of type of support you need for home isolation is of a high order. Measuring thermometer temperature in all the thing, 98.4, 99.4 on a thermometer, and in some sense you're looking at even a digital one, making sense of it, an oximeter, its access, its availability, its interpretation. These are not things you do in a day, and you don't do it at the time when everybody is sick. So you will require a very high degree of volunteer or ASHA or community health worker support. And that degree of support being so difficult to organize, it is better to be able to aggregate them into an institution. So there are very many reasons why this whole thing of we have asked them to do this should be done by health workers, this shall be done, is not going to happen. And we are not, shall we say, acquitted of the responsibility just because we've written it into guidelines on this, because we have to actually see whether even a proportion of that is being implemented on that. Now, therefore, when I come into an isolation, the quality of support, and I would say this is what an ASHA needs to do, or this is what a community health volunteer needs to do, to make sure that the household does this, rather than say that this is what the household needs to do, because it is what do you support the household to do, is the idiom at which you say, because this sort of general message put out there at the guidelines, how do you even communicate? Communicating all the aspects of isolation, as you going on individual talk, requires a high degree of communication. So therefore, we would look at it. And the first, of course, that I'm just going to, because you've given me the topic of the granular part, just flag 9 points that I think is extremely important that we communicate. One is the physical isolation, clothes, utensils, rooms. How does one structure it within a household? So perhaps you need to move the old person into some other household, and because you can't actually separate the rest of the house into 2 rooms. So if there is some people more vulnerable than the person who is tested positive, you move them out. I think this is an important service that you do. The second is this COVID appropriate behaviors. 3 masks come. We've yet to reach 1 mask successfully. And at some point, why do these issues at some sense of physical distancing, how do you actually engage in a discussion with them so that you look at a very much more communicative, two-way health communication to be able to do COVID appropriate behavior, but to support them. 3, the monitoring of fever, progress of symptoms, and a pulse oximeter. Even in a village, to actually have 1 or 2 volunteers with a pulse oximeter who will go around and measure it twice a day is a challenge. It's a huge challenge. To actually think that people will have it and be able to measure it is really, and the number of pulse oximeters being made available are far short of it. 4th is when you take the decision to move to a hospital, that triaging that happens at the house, that is one important role. And then you have this whole area of being able to help them combat stigma. It's a reality over there. The way they are actually excluded, the way they are put under very high degrees of pressure. And that particular thing of being able to protect them from a stigma and provide access to essential services to those in the house is another important challenge that we have. I am not looking at sophisticated forms of mental health, but really conversation, reassurance, a certain minimum thing is also a major necessity for many of these people. When it comes to medication beyond paracetamol, I am not in favor of any of these other medicines. The evidence basis is very thin. Your supply chain is even thinner. And finally, you are creating a distraction from what needs to be done. You're giving a false sense of hope and assurance around medication as if something will be done. But that's not what we ivermectin, budesonide. It's okay. Your government is at some point it's actually passing the buck. And I'm afraid that if you do not have this quality of home isolation support, then it is a form of denial of care. And therefore, at some point, to actually serious about home isolation, the entire mechanism of the trained volunteer who is going to go there and be able to ensure that it is done, the ratio of how many people will be required, all of that requires to be worked out on that. And not to forget, contacts. The point about contact tracing is no longer relevant, is a different logic, because community transmission is a different logic altogether. But if somebody is infected in the house, how does he caution the others who are likely to be infected? How does he caution the friends whom he has met so that the chains of transmission are limited? So there is a big role in being able to do contact tracing, not as part of a national strategy, but part of a local containment to prevent the spread happening within that, which is a much better way of doing it than locking the village down or locking the street down and using the police and putting stickers and tapes and barricades all over the street. That's particularly serves no purpose, but it would have served a lot of purpose if they actually counsel them to find their contacts and be able to caution them and quarantine where necessary. So you have this whole set of things that you need to do, which is quite a lot of doing. Even the simple thing of getting people to understand when mask wearing is essential and when you can actually, if you need a break, you can break with it. To say things, anyway, much of the guidelines is just talking, you make sure the rooms are ventilated as if you have an option in most places. Even at, so there are many places where you have to actually go there and somebody may be able to dialogue as to how they can increment within their context the best things they can do. But the bottom line, I say again, we must push for better institutional isolation facilities, which is very well put, that you can take over hostels of or school buildings or college institutions or panchayat bhavans, where you create a comfortable institutional isolation, where all these things which one has listed can actually be done in a monitored and supervised way. But it's difficult, and therefore in places you will need to provide that support. So very strong health communication supporting the action of the health volunteer is a must. Thank you. I will stop.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sundar. So you said that home isolation is not desirable, but it's unavoidable, which is a good...
Chandrakant, we are not hearing you. I'm not hearing you.
Can you hear me now? Can anybody hear?
Yes, sure.
Okay. So, Dr. Sundar, thank you very much for your intervention. And you highlighted that while home isolation may not be that desirable, but it's unavoidable. You also flagged the issue that it is having a guideline does not merely mean that the entire responsibility is shifted to the individuals or people. You flagged that the role of health system in facilitating that people can stay in home isolation is still there. So when we will come for the next round, I'll pose a question to you. I'm just giving early heads up that please think about that. If there are few best practices or some learning from other programs which can be extrapolated for home isolation in COVID-19, we will ask you in the next round 2, when we will have a question and answer. So
a strong hint you're giving.
Yes, sir. So we'll move quickly to Dr. Santosh Giri. She is Executive Director of Kolkata Rishta, an organization which works at the grassroots level with the transgender community. I would request her to speak about the challenges, the ground reality of LGBTQ community, and what could be done to strengthen home isolation or possibility of home isolation in that specific population group. Dr. Santosh Giri, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chandrakant, for giving me the space. I'll speak in English and Hindi both, because some of the community members are also here and they are hearing me. So I think it's very important to speak in both the languages. Are you guys okay for that? Means your panelists and other people, those who are attending.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. So the thing is that, honestly speaking, the home isolation is nothing new for us. We are isolated from the last 400, 500 years, and it's nothing new. But yes, in this time, this home isolation is very, very much important, because this is only where we can save our life and save our friend's life. But the most important is that when we talk about the home isolation, it's something like, it's very challenging, because the people like me, the people like others, like the trans people, those who are doing sex work, baking and all, वो किस तरह से home isolate पे रह सकते हैं? Because many of us are staying in the slums area, और वहाँ पे जो the thing is that which is very, very much difficult. एक छोटे से झोपड़ी में the people are 10, 15 people are staying, 10-15 transgenders एक साथ रहते हैं, and it is very difficult time. When the second wave, we have seen that many of us transgenders we are losing, and it's very something very means very shocking that when we see that our friends, those who are not having the ID card, like transgenders की ID card and all, and they are registered as a male. और फिर हम जा रहे हैं तो वहां पे उनकी डेड बॉडी भी मिलना मुश्किल हो जा रहा है. So when we talk about the specifically home isolation की बात हम करते हैं, I don't think कि अभी तक हम लोगों के लिए किसी ने या हम लोगों ने भी कोशिश किया है कि होम आइसोलेट कैसे किया जा सकता है. But we are, honestly speaking, we are not in that उस पोजीशन में पहुंचे हैं because we don't have that much of resource. Recently, we have started a shelter home for the transgenders people in Kolkata, and we are working in the 4 states of India: Bihar, Jharkhand, UP, and Bengal. And recently, we have started a shelter home. और वहाँ हम लोग we are keeping 25 transgenders. लेकिन they are very much important. Those who are not having corona, but जिसको symptomatic है वो कहाँ जाएंगे? मैं अपने बताऊं क्योंकि मैं जब ट्रांसजेंडर्स को लेके गई, there is no ambulance want to take because जो हमारे फ्रेंड थे वो HIV पॉजिटिव थे and they reject. और लास्ट में when they agreed to take us, they are charging 5 kilometer का रुपया and they don't want to give respect. ये बहुत ही मुश्किल. The hospital registered as male identity, identity card. So that's a very problematic issue. अभी हमारे लिए बहुत हो गया है और हम रोजाना मर रहे हैं. I don't have, the government is having any of you people. I know there are very big people. I'm very honored to be the part of this session, but I don't think that anybody have this particular data about how many transgenders are dying every day or in a week. We don't have. I just want to say that some of our friends saying that oximeter, paracetamol and all on those things. Sir, there is no space, no medicine, no ambulance, no oxygen. Honestly speaking, आप लोग पता लगा सकते हैं, बहुत समस्याएं हैं. And it is just because there is less support. We don't, at least, आप लोगों को मैं बताना चाहूंगी, I want to flag this issue. Sorry if I'm, I don't know. I know I have 5 to 7 minutes, but I'll have to complete it. But it's very important. I wrote it to the many organizations and they agreed. Yes, we want to support you for the home isolation. You can develop some home isolation or something. And later on they say, sorry, you are not our partner. So can you people understand where we are standing? क्या हम अभी पार्टनरशिप के ऊपर डिपेंड कर लें कि हमें वो मदद करेंगे और तब जाके होगा? और हमारा एक बहुत बड़ा इतना मोटा कागज जाना चाहिए to be the partner of that big organizations. I don't want to bring that organization's name, लेकिन I can share you the story that कि एक महीने से हम लोग कह रहे हैं कि we need home isolation का कुछ तो सेंटर बनाइए जहाँ पे हमारे लोग जाके रह पाए. एक पर्टिकुलर कोई सेंटर बनाइए जहाँ पे वो लोग रह पाए. They agreed, and yesterday only I received a message from them that they regret that they can't be able to support. But previously they said that they are supporting. So can you people understand where we are standing? And it is not that I'm here to asking fund from you. I'm asking if we really want to do something in the humanitarian ground, we should start. We don't have to think whether हम कब उनके साथ partner बनेंगे, कब उनके MOU के साथ हमारा MOU sign. I know important, but यदि मर जाएगा इंसान तो फिर उसके लिए क्या फायदा? It doesn't make sense. Sorry, I'm very straight here. और मुझे लग रहा है कि हमें इन बातों पे बात करनी चाहिए. And I know there are many problems. Sorry, I'm coughing from the last 15 days. और मुझे डर लग रहा था, मैं जाके कोरोना टेस्ट कराई, got my negative. But फिर मुझे डर है कि मुझे हो जाए, because we are working in ground. Daily we are going to rationing support. The person, those who are HIV positive and TB affected transgenders, उनको जाके दवा देना. And there is no transportation. There is no single transportation चल रहा है. We are hiring the auto. हमारे पास वही capacity है. We are hiring the auto and we are going to the our friend's house to give them doses of ART and TB cup. So this is the things which I think which we will have to see how we can be able to stand together. क्योंकि मैं बार बार बता दूं, I'm not here to asking you people to please मुझे पैसे दीजिए. At least हम लोग resource जुगाड़ करें and to stand together irrespective of any genders. और हम उनको ये काम करें, क्योंकि मैं आज जब पढ़ रही थी कि leaving no one behind, and I know चंद्रकांत you know very well कि जब हम कहते थे कि leave no one behind, जब मैं टोक्यो में थी तो मैंने वहां पे डिक्लेरेशन दिया था कि leave no one behind का ये होना चाहिए, और आज हम लोग leave no one behind हैं. We are here, those who left behind, and it is not good at all. And we are in really danger zone. बहुत बहुत danger zone में है. I just want to stop myself here, but again I want to say, you friends, there is nothing अभी तक जो हम लोगों को support कर सके. I know some speakers told कि पैरासिटामोल खाना है, ये खाना है, ऑक्सीमीटर. क्या अवेयरनेस है हमारे कम्युनिटी के अंदर में कि उनको पता लगे कि हम what is the level of the oxygen is good for you and what is the level of the pulse is good for you? नहीं है. हम में से किसी के पास मतलब हमारे ट्रांस कम्युनिटी में ये जागरूकता ही नहीं है. और सबसे पहला जो वायलेंस की बात एक मित्र ने कहा है, आई थैंक्स टू हिम, कि उसने कहा लेकिन विच इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट कि उस घर में जब हम रहते हैं अपने भाई के बहन के साथ, वहां इतनी प्रॉब्लम आ जा रही है क्योंकि सब एक साथ रह रहे हैं और हम रोजाना मर रहे हैं पर एड्रेस नहीं हो रहे. एंड एज ऑफ नाउ यहीं के लिए मैं बंद करती हूँ. आई एम सॉरी बट जो रियलिटी थी वो मैंने आप लोगों के सामने रखा इसलिए क्योंकि ये इम्पोर्टेंट प्लेटफॉर्म है और यहाँ रखना जरूरी है. थैंक यू.
Thank you very much, Dr. Santosh. So you flagged the issue that there are a few things yet to be done before we go to home isolation, raising awareness in the community about various aspects of COVID-19. And you also flagged the issue that for LGBTQ community, forget about home isolation, even getting at institutional isolation is a challenge in itself. I think these are the kind of dialogue and discourse coming from grassroots which will help in developing these guidelines. Quickly moving to the next speaker, my advantage is that all of them are so eminent that I don't have to introduce them that much. So Dr. Yogesh Jain is a trained pediatrician at AIIMS and currently he works as a public health physician in Sangwari, Chhattisgarh. Dr. Yogesh Jain, over to you. You are mute. Please unmute yourself. Dr. Jain.
Yeah. So thanks for having me. I will be talking mainly on the basis of my experience in Chhattisgarh, in particularly rural areas, where I would say to say that COVID has taught us that we know about acute respiratory infections where only 5% require. Otherwise, in non-COVID acute respiratory infections require hospitalization. In COVID, it is almost 15%. And we know that there are no good ways till now known which can predict who's going to get who's going to require hospitalization. And the points as flagged by Sundar, the need and also the feasibility of hospitalization are key concerns. Need is certainly known, but feasibility is a key concern. And remember, we started last year with 100% hospitalization of everyone with COVID. Decided again then on field hospitals like COVID care centers, and then now got into isolating at home. I remember in the first 6 months in Chhattisgarh, they were not allowing anyone home isolation, even in the cities. And in rural areas, as I have to say again, as a blanket statement, not only the distance from secondary and tertiary care is a defining feature, but also less resources. And actually, they are clinical deserts they are in terms of space, staff, skills, staff, and systems. So the one question that always came up was when we have to isolate people outside hospitals. The question that has been: can all rural homes allow isolation of the sick and reverse isolation of the non-sick who are at risk? The obvious answer is no. But And as we also realized over time, even in what while we are trying to establish home isolation services in Chhattisgarh, that there are clearly identified needs like, food preparation and serving of people, cleanliness and hygiene and sanitary needs of the people who are, inmates in such an isolation facility, health monitoring and treatment, security, sleeping arrangements which people like, entertainment also, and desirable comfort. In a sense, whatever is necessary at home has to be available at such a community isolation facility. And the question that is often posed is community isolation better because clinical observation and referral is easier, or the nutrition and comfort can be provided for, and the fact that we can protect the high-risk family members who otherwise would be, at risk of being exposed in a poorly done home isolation. And so I would leave with this question: can community isolation in a panchayat hall or in a school be as good as home isolation? And I think the reverse is that question is also, it's not an easy answer that it is yes or no. So the second bit is about community isolation versus hospitalization, as is being now debated upon. So, but if we know that if all the high risk factors are accounted for, it might so happen that not only 15%, as is often said, maybe 30% of people required to be in a hospital, which is actually not is easy or even desired by the people who are in villages. Or should we, on the reverse way, should we start offering things that we offer in a hospital at home or in a community isolation, such as oxygen through concentrators or through, and there have been, these are some of the city fads that have happened. People started taking oral steroids and even anticoagulants for so-called moderately severe disease rather than, for very severe or for critical care, critical COVID. So that these were options that were explored by the city people. But could this be offered in a rural area also? Is a question. And I would say here, even if it is a slightly a strong statement, that hospitals in this pandemic have largely failed systemically. Also, they have been impersonal, they have been expensive. And the places these are places where large proportion of doctors and even nurses don't even step into the wards. If I talk about district hospitals of Chhattisgarh, most of the doctors don't even step into the wards. They stand at the gate of the ward and advise something in the next 15 minutes. And in fact, people who are above 50 years of age, those senior doctors have stopped going to hospitals, fearing irrationally that they would die due to COVID, and as well as leaving the field, as it were. So our experience in rural isolation in Chhattisgarh has been, the question that comes up: who provides the home monitoring and care? ASHA or any other village leader? Are they protected or they are not protected? Largely in the two districts that I know, rural isolation has been attempted using Mitanins, as they're called in Chhattisgarh. They have been largely unprotected. I know from anecdotal experience from at least 10 states that most places, including Maharashtra, that the ASHA workers have been largely unprotected if they have been providing home monitoring and home care. Are they being provided any specific honorarium? Chhattisgarh does not offer at the moment any honorarium, extra honorarium for people who are going home. And what are we providing any health insurance should they fall sick, or if they, or in the process that they die? Yes, vaccination has been done for people at home who are going to provide for all the Mitanins in Chhattisgarh. But the other question is, are they willing? There are also these are questions that we are still grappling with. And in fact, in many places, we have had to get in not Mitanins, but other village volunteers who can take over. And lastly, the question on impact on non-COVID care, which is a huge issue. We realize when you make ASHA, who's doing, and at this moment, we are choosing to have at a national level a ratio of ASHA to a health worker to a population of 1 in 1,000. It's the same as what we are asking for the doctor, 1 in 1,000 to population. And with this, the load of problems that she has to handle, if she has to do it well, there would leave little scope if she was to also handle COVID care and by without neglecting non-COVID care. So rural isolation is happening, but I would say care largely no. Rural isolation is happening, but rural care largely no. The guidance is there, as we know from these the latest guidelines also. But where are the oximeters and training? Even 2 weeks after these guidelines have been issued by the central government, the oximeters have yet to arrive in most of my state at least. And what about the training? And when are we? And this has to be done here and now. And it is not. So the urban Delhi, yes, did it, but they did it at home isolation and home monitoring by the people themselves. And they had a redundancy built in. So, but in Chhattisgarh, I would say this is early days, and we are still in a learning curve how this happens. But I must say, as one single statement, rural home isolation is feasible. It's not that it is completely unfeasible and should be abandoned, but it requires a lot of things to be done. And this word about community isolation in panchayat buildings or schools sounds very exciting, but I know that there are extremely few examples of success because they can't happen without a high level of community participation, not just by a mere administrative fiat. And ambulance services support for ASHAs and village volunteers are still extremely poor, I would say. Helpline services and call services for rural patients are infantile. If there are call services, they are being usually offered for city people by some physicians who have been made to sit in these helpline centers. And finally, I would like to end with this picture, which I saw in the newspaper today. Can COVID experience, and inexperience in home isolation bring care closer to homes post-COVID? This is a picture of a woman who was taken for a obstetric process, 21 kilometers hanging by a pole, as it were. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jain, for a very in-depth and critical, insightful presentation. You have raised many questions. To answer some of those questions, maybe outside this webinar, we will ask your response to some of these questions. Quickly moving to the next speaker, Dr. Abhay Bang. He is also another eminent expert who does not need any introduction. People know about his work in Gadchiroli for the last 3 decades and more. Dr. Bang, over to you. I really wish we had more time, but we have only 5 to 7 minutes to listen to you. So thanks for your understanding. Over to you.
Thank you, Chandrakant, Sunila, Bulbul, personally and as organizations for organizing this. And you have chosen a provocative topic. I'm sure you don't need just confirmation of what is being done, but what is actually being experienced in the field in reality. In one line, I would say, home management, yes. Home isolation, 3 question marks. We need to distinguish between home management of sick and home isolation, which is really isolation which you impose so that the infection should not spread to others. So the goals are different. And with the number of cases that we have and poor health infrastructure, whether we like or not like, but probably we have no other option but home management for most of the cases. But home isolation, I'm going to argue that is neither feasible, and I am going to even question the science of home isolation. Now, let me quickly start with, because you have given me topic of experience in tribal area. When last year COVID arrived, and on March 24th, the Prime Minister announced national lockdown, we quickly moved, and within one month, we established a program of community-based corona prevention primarily, not so much of care at that time, in 108 villages, rural as well as tribal. Initial 1 month, 1.5 months, people were scared. That was a stage of panic. And people probably out of precaution introduced very rigorous village isolation. They didn't allow even outsiders to come in. Immigrants were stopped. Immigrants were were forced to stay quarantined in outside school or some building for 14 days. They didn't take back their own sons also coming back from Mumbai. So that stage passed. After 1.5 months, people started questioning. They said, "Isse to kuch bhi to nahi hai is bimari mein." And real COVID wave arrived in Gadchiroli actually in September. So the first 6 months, we unnecessarily created scare. And forced several restrictions and people saw that there were neither cases nor serious consequences. And so people lost faith in our scientific advice. After that initial 1.5 month phase, when community really was very afraid, they had heard in media, मर जाते हैं लोग, बड़ी दुनिया भर की महामारी आ गई है. Lekin later on, people stopped cooperating. And subsequently, now this year what happened was that because those who were tested by ASHAs or ANMs on large scale, but those who tested positive, health team usually took them out, quarantined them at the taluka places, and then they became, if they became serious, they were hospitalized. Now, whatever rumors or negative experiences people saw spread by word of mouth, but people consider being tested as a very serious risk. If you are found positive, it is almost like HIV testing. If you are found positive, you are isolated. In people's perception, you are punished. Why should I offer myself for testing? And so people now hide symptoms. People don't even tell you that they have fever, they have cough and cold-like symptoms, because they are afraid that they'll be tested and they'll be forced to isolate. So this is the reality as it happened in 108 villages in Gadchiroli. Apart from what Sundar and Chandrakant both said, it is practically impossible in a common rural household to have a separate room where you can isolate the person. That's very, very true. So I don't have to even get into that. But it is difficult to convince ordinary villager the very need of isolation. From his viewpoint or her viewpoint, most of the symptoms are mild upper respiratory infection symptoms or fever or body ache. Earlier, a study that we did, epidemiologic study on 700 randomly selected children, following them for 2 years. Average attack of upper respiratory infections per child per year was 6. So if a child gets 6 attacks per year, and now the symptoms are indistinguishable, you don't know whether the upper respiratory infection or viral fever and the corona, you can't distinguish. So actually then either you get tested every time or you isolate the child and family 6 times a year. Impossible. Plus, it's very difficult to convince. People would say, "Ye to cough and cold jaisa hai." Now, let me ask you honestly a question. When you and I get attack of common cold in usual situation, do we isolate ourselves so that our colleagues in our office or elsewhere should not get our infection, or family members should not get my common cold? We don't. We continue our operations. Maybe somebody gets my common cold, so be it. That's how people look at these episodes, the mild symptoms. And as we know, 85% are mild symptom. And I think even Yogesh said 85% are mild symptom. But there is a gross underestimation, or actually underestimation, because it is out of those who are tested positive that the 85% have mild symptoms. But most of the people really either asymptomatic or they have only mild symptom. They never go for testing. So they are removed from our denominator. Those who turn up at the health center because they have more symptoms. So there is a selection bias in those who are being tested. There is a selection bias. That's why we say 15% have moderate disease or serious disease. I doubt really. In reality, that percentage is much less. And from what we know, just few days ago mentioned, and the New York Times has published an article, and New York Times has estimated upper range, lower range, that total number of infection cases in India, so infection have been somewhere around 50 to 70 crore. Even Vinod, in one of his presentation, it is reported in the newspaper that he made the estimation upper limit 60 crore people already have had infection. So if everybody, half of the population or nearly 40% of the population had symptoms or asymptomatic infection, the question of isolation to me is not only not possible, people are not going to accept it, but now I'll come to the latter part. Is it scientifically advisable? We know that the infection, most of the infection transmission occurs either because of asymptomatics or pre-symptomatics. When you won't isolate them at all, you can't. And actually the viral load rapidly diminishes after the symptoms appear. So you isolate them when they are really less likely to pass infection, and we let the infection pass on because there is no symptom at that time. At least in this wave, it's very common to see that if one family members get infection, everybody in the family gets infection. So probably this virus is more contagious. So by the time you talk about isolation, probably most of the family members already have had infection. So is it really of any use to isolate when the infection symptoms have occurred? Usually people don't seek help by third or fourth day. Then you do testing. By that time, probably viral load is gone down. Secondly, do we know really scientifically that how much of infection transmission is attributable to airborne, droplet-borne, hands, and surfaces? We don't know. We are borrowing from some study either in the US or Canada or New Zealand or China. What is happening in Indian community, we don't know. But still we are borrowing some guidelines and we are enforcing it on everybody, impractical guidelines. I would even say questionable validity guidelines. And when an airborne infection occurs, it is so difficult to prevent transmission within a household. So our guidelines, maybe they were in good faith at the beginning, at the early stage of knowledge. But as Sundar's talk was titled granularity, we need to further go into granularity, which guidelines and practices are really science based and which were only common sense based, but can be now discarded. Lastly, one or two things. One is that certain cultural practices already existed in tribal society and many of the rural areas in Hindu society that I have visited or lived with. One is called Sutak. When somebody dies in the family, there is a 13 days of Sutak, social cultural isolation that family isolates. People cook for the family and they provide them food, but this family doesn't mix with other people. So actually concepts like Sutak could have been borrowed for Corona. अगर कोरोना की केस है तो ये सूतक में जाती है फैमिली, तो कांटेक्ट नहीं होगा. बट इट इज डिफिकल्ट टू कन्विंस. वहां डेथ होती है तो सूतक नेचुरली अपील होता है. यहाँ तो कुछ नहीं है, एक माइल्ड सिम्टम है या एसिम्टोमेटिक है और आप उनको कहेंगे कि तुम 10 दिन आइसोलेट करो, तो दिस इज नॉट एक्सेप्टेड and this is of doubtful validity. So when the infection numbers have already crossed 50 crore, even at the underestimation, infection numbers have crossed 50 crores, I really doubt whether home isolation has any validity, any meaning. Home management, yes. As a practical compulsion, we need to provide probably a lot of management of mildly symptomatics at home. The various questions raised by Sundar and Yogesh about certain precautions, they are all valid. And yet, just because of compulsion, probably most of the management of COVID is going to happen at home. It will be home management. How do we triage and streamline is a very practical question. Home isolation to me is of very questionable validity.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dr. Bang. I think what we are hearing from you that there is a lot of work need to be done before we operationalize the concept of home isolation in all settings. It need the importance and relevance for a particular setup need to be understood. We need to understand that community, and you have applied the similar issue, which Dr. Sundaraman also said that it's not about merely operationalization, but it's about facilitating the right kind of care, whether it's through home isolation or home case management. But ultimately, by merely saying that home isolation need to be done, the health system cannot shrug off its responsibility. It still need to be involved in that process. So thanks, and thanks for adhering to the time. Without further ado, I move to Ms. Mirai Chatterjee. She's another person. All of the panelists in this panel are widely known. She's internationally renowned for her work with SEWA and community-based organization, especially females self-help groups. So, Ms. Chatterjee, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chandrakant Bhai, and good to be with many colleagues and fellow travelers. Much has been said already, but I'd like to start with what we see on the ground, particularly among women workers of the informal economy. And what we see is tremendous fear and anxiety and a trust deficit. And I mention this because I think all of this then leads to choices and behaviors that families make. And I like the distinction of home isolation and home management. I think that in our experience, no matter what guidelines are presented by whatever, and in good faith, with all good intention, first of all, this knowledge of these guidelines don't reach to the grassroots, and certainly women are the last to have access to this. So first and foremost, whatever guidelines there are, such as they are, whatever is implementable given people's realities, and they're really very, very different realities in our country. That's another point I want to make. We really have to go micro and trust communities to make the best decisions given their reality. But I'll come back to that later. But I think the first point is that they have with such low health literacy levels in our country, particularly among women, people just don't know what simple do's and don'ts are even there. Then there's no question of allowing them to be in home isolation, or doctor deciding so-and-so needs home isolation and so-and-so needs to go to a COVID center or hospital. They make their own choice. And like many speakers have said, our experience also is that people do not want to get tested, whether we speak about urban low-income communities in Ahmedabad, Delhi, or Surat, or we speak of tribal areas, which, South and North Gujarat, Adivasi areas where we were, and organized women. People make their own choices and they manage as best as they can given their realities. I mean, everyone has spoken to space and the issue of toilets also. We are told, separate toilet. Well, you're lucky if you have a toilet in the first place. So those are the kinds of ground realities that our people face. The second thing, though, is that also we have to facilitate home isolation. One thing that women keep saying to us, women who have symptoms, they may or may not have COVID, we don't know, because as has been said, they don't. Testing means you'll be dumped in some hospital and you will not come home. So is the question that women ask is, who will feed my family? I mean, we've had a number of members who themselves are sick, supposed to be in home isolation, but they get up and cook because there's no system of, providing tiffin service or whatsoever as in the urban areas. So that's a major issue. Then the isolation itself, I mentioned fear and trust deficit. You only trust. It's been very clear to local people, why only women, that we are now left to our own devices. You figure out as best as you can. You try and arrange and manage as best as you can. And I think, the whole issue of doctors is also, where are the doctors in the areas that we're working in, some of the tribal areas like Sabarkantha and North Gujarat. As has been said by Dr. Abhay, the villagers have just done a kind of nakabandi. They've closed off their village. They don't want anyone coming. They don't go to hospitals. They don't get tested, so on and so forth. So, where do you begin in such scenario? They just don't have trust. in outsiders, in the medical system, in the health system, which has failed them so miserably all these years, as many have said. So we have to also, if we're talking about home isolation, there has to be some, conditions that support people, and particularly women. The other thing, though, on the positive side that we have found is that when you have self-help groups, when you have collectives, when you have cooperatives and unions, there is the solidarity. Not all women have smartphones, but people do phone, people send audio messages, voice messages, transmit information on simple do's and don'ts, even proning and so on, which people do find useful. I mean, we've already spoken that there are hardly any oximeters and thermometers available. We've been able to put these in the hands of our frontline workers, and they have been. And for many of the villages, like all of you, these are the only instruments that are available. I mean, the primary health centers and the doctors were rather grateful that we had these available in the hands of the frontline workers. So these are some of the situations that we face. Also, what has been helpful has been setting up teleconsultation. We can do all we can, and we can talk to our sisters, we can talk to our members on the phone, our Seva sisters, but there are times when they also need reassurance from a doctor, and we've been able to set up teleconsultation. And the positive aspect is, of course, everywhere internet is also an issue, but we have the positive aspect I want to say is that number of doctors have come forward in several languages. We've been able to set this up in 6 languages, and that has been a support. Just to hear a voice at the other end, whether it's someone from your own cooperative or whether it's a doctor, has been really important. I think some has been said about COVID centers. Our experience is it's a very mixed picture. In some parts, it has worked, and people have said, okay, we can't home isolate because we have tiny homes, but we will go to the school, if there are facilities, if there is someone there. Our members who are migrant workers, and particularly male migrant workers in places like Surat, have wanted to go to these centers because they say home isolation is just not possible. But this also needs an intensive campaign and also attendance at these centers. Many times people go to these centers because they have tiny homes, but there's nothing there, no facility, no one to support, no one to check up on them. So I think wherever it's worked, and before this call, I did speak with other civil society organizations as well. And I have one good example in Bardmer in Western Rajasthan, where the NGO Unnati worked very closely with the civil administration and with local people in the desert districts. And they did actually use the center, and they had ashas over there and so on and so forth. So I guess what I'm saying is I agree that home isolation for the kinds of people that many of us work with is virtually impossible. I like the concept of home management. I think people try to manage as best as they can. And I think we have to take a sort of micro, local by local approach, because really one size doesn't fit all in this country of ours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chatterjee. So, really valuable points. You spoke about the trust of the people, or the lack of trust, so to say, and outside health system. As an outsider, you also flagged the issue of how the self-help group and civil society organization can play a role in these aspects. You shared about good practices. So before moving to the next round, I'm just sharing that since we have exceeded time, we are going to extend this session by 10 minutes. It will be very unfair if we don't take audience or participant questions. Also, I hope our panelists can stay for another 10 minutes. But also, since we discussed the issue of best practices or good practices, we have participants around 200 or plus participants. I'm requesting them, if they think in the setup where they have been working, if there is any good practice which they think that can be an example of home isolation, please write in the chat box, and we will get back to you to explore further that whether this could be a really good practice. And that would be really important contribution from you for this workshop or this webinar. moving quickly to questions from the participants, and I request the first question is for Dr. Sundar Raman, and I'm just going to change the question, not the original question which I asked. Rather, this is a participant question. I'm not asking my question. So, Dr. Sundar, for you, the question is that how can health communication be strengthened for effective home isolation?
The first thing is we must stop victim blaming, as it's called, the real bane of health communication as it is practiced. Plus, what I call over here a very law and order approach to health communication. Where you shame people. Public shaming is your understanding. Criminalization of behavior is your understanding. You have the most outrageous, where the home department and the police mindset handles health communication rather than being able to really look at what is supportive health communication. I don't know where so many decades of public health teaching on health communication disappeared at our moment of greatest need. I would really say there's some curse why we could not think of segmentation of audience, look at appropriate determinants of behavior, all the stuff that we've taught and practiced. I thought with HIV, with tobacco control, we have learned many of these lessons. Yet you have had the most bland, standardized, stereotyped, uniform messages spread without any understanding of audience segmentation. One of the worst health communication campaigns that we have seen. Look, so many of us who are on the field talked about stigma, talked about fear, talked about the way people are isolated. There is no messaging on this. There is zero messaging on this. Health communication. People don't understand. For example, I know one person in the fieldwork that we did who was crying because in the middle of the night, they shifted him. He thought he was going to a hospital, but they took him to a college hostel. And he didn't understand why he was being brought to a hostel. They were saying he was very sick, but they were bringing him to a hostel. There is no communication about the difference between an isolation, in a community isolation, and a care center and a hospital. So I've never seen, could imagine that we've had a very poor, so health communication is a professional area. At some point, we have a lot of experience with it. And it's been overwhelmed by this law and order approach that started with the lockdown. So as a result, there is a very poor understanding of even what prevents transmission, because it's overwhelmed by these all-encompassing messages. And you cannot try to protect against all possible sites of communication. You have to focus on the most probable, as different from all possible, most probable. So I find that at many levels, the health communication campaign has left a great desire. We've never seen the sort of campaign, the stereotyping in the campaign, the lack of communication segments, interpersonal communication. Even if you have a home isolation thing, the very fact that you will need to spend some time in counseling that person or to all that goes into home isolation, what is required, whether they can do it, the whole process, very few people practice it. But I must tell you, because you were looking for best practices, that the triaging centers in Chennai have actually done a good job. They have got young people over there. And I don't know whether it's all of Tamil Nadu. I have bad news also from some districts. But I do know that some of the triaging centers, at least the good ones, they have people who actually, when they tell them, no, you don't need hospital, you need to go home, they actually invest some time in telling them what all they have to look out for in home and finding out. And they actually find out whether that home is suitable for isolation or not. But I'm afraid that is a little bit of an exception. But in many places where that triaging center at that site, if everybody positive is brought to a center where you have a team which can actually counsel them. It's not as good as visiting the home for support, but at least one proper communication they get, it would make a difference. But I'm afraid that many people don't have any health communication worth the name on all these aspects. It takes time, it takes conversation.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dr. Sundar. So, since we have another few minutes, so what I'll do, I'll request each of the panelists to say a few concluding remarks and thoughts. But before that, I have only one specific question for Dr. Yogesh Jain, and then I'll request other panelists to have their concluding points, each one in 1 minute, please. So for Dr. Jain, the question is, which has been asked, is that what could be done to build a strong network of care or management at the village level, including a strategy for the community participation. So at village level, strong network of care management through community participation. Any thoughts on that?
So I think besides the suggestions that Sundar just made about making it a healthcare issue rather than as a law and order, messaging. In fact, if you know that the entire COVID care is with the Ministry of Health at the moment in the country, this is the level that we have reduced ourselves to, rather than in the health department, health ministry. That apart, I think at community level, the ostracization and the neglect of the civil society partners and NGOs that has been the language of this present regime needs to change. We need to bring in back. It's not possible for the state machinery as it is in an impersonal way to be able to engage with the community. I think we should, we have enough examples of how some of the best public health practices have emerged from, work by civil society partners, by NGOs. They need to be engaged with, and I think in a particular way, getting to both panchayat formations and non-panchayat formations in the community, whether it is the Federation of Self-Help Groups or forest farmers organizations or women's organizations, who could even who could even elect some sort of volunteers to be able to support home isolation and partner with the ASHA or in the community, and as well as with the Anganwadi worker, to be able to sort of make a team that first enlists community participation and then practices then ensures home care, if I may say.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks. So then I'll move to each of the panelists for their concluding remarks. I'll go in the same order in which we started. Dr. Sunila Garg first, and then I'll come to Dr. Bulbul Sood.
Thank you, everyone, for very, very strong inputs and very valuable inputs. And thank you, Dr. Chandrakant, for carrying it so well. I'll say that, on staying in Delhi for quite some time and spending quite a bit of my 1.5 decade at Sevagram, let me tell you that. You see, on one hand is a system which is overwhelmed, which is where we have insensitive providers, as Dr. Bang said, that people go only if they have to go once or twice, and people only go for oxygen monitoring, but next time we find that they are coming back, they're no more alive, kind of, system is really overwhelmed. And it is not across only Delhi. You look at Mumbai, you look at, different parts. And seropositivity at some places have gone up by 1,300%. So that is where we need to look at. So, somewhere we need to look at the best practices of different parts, because I remember in my older days as well, and now also primarily I feel because when this proposal was being developed, we took, Dr. Subodh Mohan's team from Sevagram, and then, and the whole, practices were taken into consideration. And I find that, primarily the document also talks in depth very strongly about, the support the village groups, they enjoy, the self-help groups, and, the village I'll say the volunteers, they are the strong this thing. As somebody raised about the question of food and all, I talked to then, Gujarat, because they have worked out on a model where Panchayati Raj and some of the village people, they are the ones who will come forward for the support, and that's what has been this thing incorporated in the document as well. So I feel that we need to look at the document in a very, very holistic manner, and we need to put in the nuts and bolts as to situation is in front of us. We need to, people are not going to go to the hospital from the village area. We need to create a structure nearby. We need to rely on people who have suffered from sickness, whether they can suffer, whether the trainings have already been started at National Institute of Public Health Training Research at Mumbai, where all the Ashas, Anganwadi workers, they're all being trained. And Dr. Deepak Raut is coordinating the training, and I feel that we need to still have 2 to 3 rounds. This has been such an exciting session of to go threadbare as to how to make the recommendations, to Niti Aayog. That's where we need to look at couple of models, how they're working. And I've been interacting with also Dr. Jain from Chhattisgarh, Kamlesh Jain. So, quite a bit of inputs have been taken. I feel that there is much more, needed to go more in depth. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sood. Before I come to you, I will request Mirai Chatterjee ji because she had to leave. Apologies.
Sorry about that.
30 seconds nearly because we are reaching. I don't know when this will get closed.
Absolutely. So just want to say that I would put my pitch on strengthening frontline workers, particularly women, both from civil society and the government side, Ashas and Anganwadi workers. We all know how they have worked at this time. And as colleagues have mentioned, they need some social protection cover like insurance as well. We have found that they work, in normal times, if you have good links with the local public health authorities, they work well together in emergency times. And I believe that they can be developed, then we need many more, of course, developed as a rapid health emergency team during difficult times such as what we're passing through now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sood.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to really thank all the panelists for very, very, eye-opening discussion. We know about it, but I think it is important for us to realize that in India, one fit is not going to be working for everyone. And as everybody has said in the past, that you may develop the guidelines, but to operationalize them, you have to be very clear what is going to work in Chhattisgarh is not going to work in Tamil Nadu, and what works in Tamil Nadu is not going to be working in Mizoram. But the clear message is that you have to contextualize, these, whether when we talk about home management or home isolation, what can be done, what can't be, what is feasible. Definitely involvement of the communities is very, very critical here, and we have to strengthen our frontline workers. As Mirai said that, you have to, these are mostly women have their own challenges, and I think in this pandemic time we have realized that they have to, not only look after their families and, take care of, their loved one, but also work in the field. And so definitely we need to have some, strong support to them. And we, are very, open about, some of these discussions that we're having. We are going to be sharing also with the government at national level as well as state government. And hopefully we should be able to really be coming out with solutions which are practical and doable. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dr. Sood. So now I'll invite Dr. Santosh Giri, if she, Dr. Giri.
Thank you for this session, and I'm really happy to see many of them having very positive views and all. From my side, I'll say that I think there's supposed to be the community-led activity should be there in the time of corona, and there's supposed to be the specific place for the transgenders people also, and the other marginalized people, if we talk about the home isolation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Giri, for being really quick. Dr. Bang.
Since the theme is on home isolation, I'll just focus on this. I have 3 sentences. Home management, yes, for several reasons, but it's compulsion that we ought to strengthen home management for most of the cases. And so ASHA need and family need more training, facilitation, and triage facility. Home isolation, scary, not practicable, and more, I think, scientifically unnecessary. The recent estimate, again, I'll refer to that New York Times article, real case fatality amongst all those who are infected, the real case fatality is 0.1%. So for such a mild illness, widespread, and even small proportion becomes serious, so it looks at a national level huge issue, but at the village level, to most of the people, it looks a mild thing. So home isolation is scary, is not accepted by the people, probably unnecessary. I would say we should switch to home precaution. And so several hygienic methods that we say for preventing easy transmission, I don't know how effective they are, because when the airborne transmission is occurring, you can't chlorinate or sterilize air. So I don't know all those, whether these hygienes, etc., are mere rituals, or are they really effective? Except for masks, I have not seen very solid evidence for anything else. But yet, I would grant that home precaution is fine, home isolation is unnecessary.
Thank you very much for valuable feedback. So, quick inputs if Dr. Jain and Dr. Yogesh Jain, you want to say last 30 seconds?
Okay, so I would say home care and home isolation go together. Isolation is a part of the care that people require when they have COVID. When it's not 100% people who are infected in the community, and as I think it is doable, but there are tough yardsticks to measure up to. And the second I would say is to involve as many civil society organizations to be able to do this beyond health NGOs. I would say organizations that work in livelihood, education, watershed, and in direct political work also should be included in being part of teams that would do ensure home care.
Thank you. Dr. Sundar, your 30 seconds. You're on mute.
I think we can do much better with home isolation, but we should not give up the concept. I also think that it is something that is done only when institutional isolation is not feasible. But it's important to actually think of a much better quality of communication and support for it, which is possible and which is the basis of it, which goes back to the strengthening of the community health worker program and our primary care program. That's where it rests. The stronger our primary care and community health worker program, the better we will do it. And we can look at Kerala, for example, in some of the areas where they have been able to do this. And it depends a lot upon that. The issue about institutional isolation, the point that Abhay Pang is making is actually should be made differently to emphasize that the pre-symptomatic period contact that has been done also requires quarantine, and somewhere we are completely missing on the quarantine aspect in the isolation. I do not think that people will refuse it. We have examples from across the world where they have been doing very successful, but we need to have effective communication. There is so much fear about this that it will drive it into a thing. But you can't isolate one member of the family from others in many situations. But the family itself, the house itself is willing. So it's that sort of flexibility. This whole guidelines is made very upper middle class oriented. But if you make it over here, I would say that within a family, we will accept that spread will happen. But from the family into the surroundings, we can do a better job of quarantine and isolation than we have done. The waves are not over. We are going to have more occasions in the coming period. I think we should not lose the importance of that level of communication. So, and I agree with Yogesh that care and isolation cannot be separated. You would need to take them together as one continuity. And people also, my sense is that people will welcome that. But let's look at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. So, with the moderator's prerogative, I would summarize with 2 sentences, 2 points. One, what we discussed that release or availability of home isolation guideline is just the start. It's not the end. And the kind of to make those guidelines operational, we require thinking and better understanding of the ground realities. And that's what we did in this webinar. So thank you very much, each of the panelists, for providing your valuable insight earned through years of experience. I really feel enriched and learned after this webinar. The second part is that while we need to bring the critical thinking, question the guideline to make them operational, but also we need to look around that are there any specific models or approaches which have been followed in different settings, and that's what how does those models and approaches fits into our critical thinking? Can those be, if not scalable to the entire country, can those be scalable in a particular subgroup, particular state, particular setting? So those are the two areas which we need to examine. And that's exactly the purpose of this discussion, that we want to look from the solution perspective with the critical inputs of experts and looking around what has been done. Of course, if need to be modified, and which probably need to be modified for different settings. The LGBTQ community require a different approach than a tribal population where maybe home isolation is not the right approach. It need to be connected with the care, that otherwise people might think that if they have to do everything, then what is the point of having home isolation? So this was really enriching and valuable discussion. I know there is a team working which will summarize the discussion. We might come back to you for your additional inputs and feedback, and please do share your additional thoughts if you want in writing, which we will utilize in the final document. Just to share with other participants that I really thank for their valuable inputs. We could not ask all the questions, but I also noticed that many of the questions were on a clinical aspect or vaccine related aspect, which was not the focus of this webinar. So, but still thanks for joining us and asking those questions. And I once again thanks all the panelists, Indian Association of Preventive Social Medicine and USAID NISHTA. With this, I hand over to Dr. Swati Mahajan, USAID NISHTA project for closing. Dr. Swati Mahajan.
Thank you, Dr. Chandrakant. So on behalf of NISHTA and JPIGO, I'm very, very grateful to IAPSM for helping us host this webinar jointly. I also thank all the eminent panelists for the enriching discussion, and I thank the audience. And thanks a lot, Dr. Chandrakant, for very wonderfully moderating. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and bye-bye.